So to follow up our David Cronenberg video from yesterday, I wanted to talk about his son, Brandon Cronenberg, who broke out in 2012 when his first movie, Antiviral, went to, I think, Cannes. And pretty much immediately, I feel like, made a name for himself in the way that you can imagine going into this as the son of David Cronenberg and how impossibly large that shadow is, and how impossible it might be to come out of it or make a name for yourself. But I don't think that's the case here. I think he's become a very individual filmmaker very, very quickly. You might even say practically out of the gate. While Antiviral didn't, like, set the world on fire or anything, there's still something here to where you can get the sense that he comes from the same lineage, but like I said, there's definitely a very original vision and voice coming out of this. So, and when you look at these three movies in general, and when you look at and yeah, they're kind of in that similar territory, like the biological territory and stuff like that. But even so, and the idea of inspiration from real life, where apparently there were a couple of inspirations for Antiviral, which were he had some sort of fever dream, and he was talking about how he was sick at one point, and the idea of having like somebody else's virus inside of you, and how weirdly intimate that is. But there's also the idea that he was watching like a Kimmel interview with Sarah Michelle Gellar, and she had like a cold or something, and she said she could infect the whole audience by sneezing or something, and for some reason the audience cheered, like they often do with the late night shows, and how just that was so bizarre. And so when you look at the topic of antiviral, it does seem like it's a bit of an obvious target to satirize celebrity worship and stuff like that, and specifically like the way the media like throughout the background also. But the thing about it is, it's one of those concepts where you see what real life is like and how people react as far as celebrity worship and stuff like that. And how people like fall in love with serial killers and write them letters and stuff like that. There's a point in time where one woman is there to presumably get the virus of a serial rapist, and you look at this concept and you think, well, yeah, of course it's super exaggerated, but at the same time, it's like, is it weird though how much I can buy this? like even if it is exaggerated, like you just buy it as a concept in general because it's believable enough that this exaggeration would be less of an exaggeration if we got further into the timeline that this movie's set in, and that's unsettling in itself. There's also the whole concept of taking like the cells of celebrities and making meat that people like not only consume but like fight over it, and it's like I said, the thing about it is the weird concept of why does this sound believable? Why does this sound as believable as it does, despite being so insane? But obviously, there's other things going on here as far as our main character, who is Caleb Landry Jones. And you'll notice something throughout Cronenberg's three movies here is that a big key to them working is him being able to find actors that are the kinds of actors that commit to crazy concepts like this and can get really really make characters that are believable, but also in these really sort of exaggerated places and these really hellish places even. And if an actor feels even slightly out of place in that kind of world, it's going to really stick out, and potentially the movie could fall apart. So you'll notice his choice in lead actors through all three movies I feel like plays a huge part in how well done these end up being. And Kay Landry Jones especially is an actor that's been around for a while, and I've loved in just about everything. But when Get Out came out, I referred to him as the Brad Dourif of his time, and I still stand by that, especially. And the idea of him leading a movie like this is, you can't really imagine this movie another way with another person. And so, when you take all of that into account, and you set it in this very sterile, futuristic world that Cronenberg's created, where it's everything has like white walls, and everything just feels like weirdly clean. And then there's the contrast of the main contrast being the sickness amongst the story itself, but just the really ugly and vile behavior of characters makes this really sterile and like white-walled world just seem really gross and disgusting nonstop, which is this really interesting contrast that they find in the idea of talking about sickness and how the movie is so focused on, physical sickness, but when you see the characters and the way they obsess and the way they react and behave, there's clearly like rampant mental sickness going on, that people aren't paying attention to because it's all about the physical sickness in this world. And so the mental illness is just running rampant with all these people, and it's just this really gross, uncomfortable world that he set up. And the idea, there's a few lines here especially that set up this idea that might seem kind of on the nose, but I feel like they work. Where he uses Nicholas Campbell plays the sort of head of the company that Caleb Landry Jones works for, and of course he's a David Cronenberg alumnus with The Brood and The Dead Zone and Naked Lunch. I think were a few he was in. He might have been in more. But he has a line where he says, celebrity is a collaboration we choose to take part in, and stuff like that, where it's like, it could seem like this sort of on-the-nose viewpoint about it, but just little things like that slip in there to where it's like, and I think that makes it even easier to buy when we get to stuff where, even though everything feels like it's super exaggerated for now, we have that moment of, God, why does this still feel so real? And so that really that sort of truth to the foundation of the exaggerated setup is going to work wonders for how we get invested in it, as far as when it becomes like more of a thriller as it goes on. And yeah, there are moments like that where it has its concept, but then it doesn't stop at just the concept and the setting like a lot of movies would. It does have like twists and turns, and the ideas expand and stuff like that. I will say, once it gets closer to like that third act area where it is kind of having more twists and turns as it goes, I appreciated those from like a writing standpoint and a structure standpoint, but I also found myself not being as interested in that as like the sort of setup itself. But that's not to take away from the fact that once again you'll notice throughout all three movies that Cronenberg's able to have a concept, this really big ambitious concept, but doesn't just stop there. Like, he finds a way to keep pushing that concept and find other doors to go through in it and stuff like that, and expand upon it. And he's certainly never lazy with his concepts the way a lot of high concept movies end up getting. And so I can appreciate that, but there's also this level of discomfort that I was talking about, where, like I said, we're in a world that's just full of sickness anyway, but it does portray that discomfort in this more visceral way that goes beyond just, watching sick people be sick. There's just, like, it appropriately, kind of gets inside you, but the thing about that is, I want to appreciate that, but there's also the idea of, it doesn't really feel like there's an emotion accompanying this, where it's, I'm not quite sure how to explain this, but it's like, when you have a certain, big reaction to a movie, but there's like an enjoyment factor, I guess, or something like that, or like a factor of suspense or something like that, where there's something where it's not just, unadulterated discomfort just by itself. And while, like I said, there are those twists and turns where it does turn into a thriller, and there are occasional moments of suspense, it doesn't really feel like there's much accompanying the discomfort. It's just straight up discomfort, and that only goes so far. Like, it's effective in general, but like as it goes on and as it goes further, it's like we need a bit more on like the emotion side. I'm not asking the movie to have like some big heart or something, but just something that kind of at least coexists with the discomfort. To sort of add something else to the power of the story itself. But it almost feels like the story itself kind of gets occasionally sidelined by just needing the audience to feel discomfort. So that's something where it's like you can see that it was a debut movie. So it's like, this is definitely something that would become more refined as he goes on, that he'll definitely start kind of perfecting along the way. Um, but because they also throw in stuff that's this sort of cynical in a good way, where we were talking about just the general gross factor of the way everybody behaves. There's also the idea of viruses being under this certain kind of like control, but and you would think like that, well, that's good with all the viruses going around, but it's not for the sake of the population. It's for copyright purposes and for big companies to use them to their own advantage. And that's another one of those things where it's like, God, why does that feel so real? Why is that exactly what would happen and the way it would go? And there's even these like there's even this great scene where he's sitting in like a hotel lobby, and he's with somebody that's like a part like works for the rival company of theirs, and they're just sort of trading barbs like they're any sort of other businessmen in any other kind of business. And it just happens to be the sort of transferring and selling of viruses, celebrity viruses, and it's just that depraved nature underneath everything that looks semi-normal at times. There's definitely something to this movie, like I said, as far as how it gets under your skin, like and appropriately so, that really works in its favor, even if it's, you know, not a particularly strong set the world on fire debut or anything like that, but you could get the sense that something was brewing here, that this guy's going to be a really great filmmaker. And we'll get to that with the very next movie, but the other two things I just wanted to throw out were, one thing that helps when we do get onto the other side of the movie is the inclusion of a couple of performances in particular, one being Malcolm McDowell as a doctor, and that's one of those cases where if you get to the point to where it's time to really liven your movie up, the idea of throwing Malcolm McDowell in when we're getting close to the third act is one of the best moves you could make. So there's that, and also a very brief but surprisingly ruthless Wendy Crewson, and like I said, it's very brief, but a performance I wouldn't have expected from her, or a character I wouldn't have expected from her. So that was a really great addition, also, and like I said, keeps that sort of third act alive, even if it's not as strong as it was building up to when we were kind of in the first 2/3 here. So yeah, so obviously there was a lot of promise there, and then when you want to talk about delivering on promise, that's what brings us to Possessor. And Possessor is a movie it took me a little bit to get to. Like, I was one of those, like, oh yeah, I still need to see that, I still need to see that. And I get what people were saying about the visceral reactions that they had, and people, like, you know, getting sick at film festivals and stuff like that, and I was kind of afraid of the movie, I guess you could say, going into it with that kind of hype, because usually that kind of stuff is a bit overhyped, especially when it comes to like horror movies and stuff like that. But knowing that this was Brandon Cronenberg's follow-up to Antiviral, and like I said, you don't want to keep comparing him to David Cronenberg, but, you know, just knowing, you know, the lineage, and it's like what this family is capable of as far as filmmakers go, it's like, when I hear this hype about how just uncomfortable and sickening the movie is, I kind of believe it this time. Like, I kind of believe the hype before I even see the movie, so I was very hesitant going into this, through no fault of the movie's own. So, going into it, first of all, I was really surprised by how much I love this. And, like, this is the movie that, like, kind of has set the bar for him, where if he's gonna, you know, create some big masterpiece at some point, this is the bar that is set and has to go over. So, first of all, the idea of the assassin concept, which is something that we've just seen over and over and over again in movies, and you would think there's not really a whole lot else you can add to the assassin, you know, plot. So this one does the assassin concept in just about the most creative way you could possibly think of, I think. Where not only is it this thing of the assassin can possess the body of a particular target and then, you know, kill whoever they need to kill, and then they avoid the aftermath of it, and adding, you know, sci-fi elements to that. But the fact that this also helps it become an acting showcase for whoever's going to be in this. So with Andrea Riseborough and Christopher Abbott in particular being our two main characters, but also like the opening scenes also, where we see how like the practical way in which in the detailed way that they take over a body, and how we see her, like, you know, practicing being normal and like practicing the way she speaks and stuff like that, and how they can physically adjust their emotions. And there's even, and talking about it being an acting showcase, there's even a point, I think, where Jennifer Jason Leigh calls Andrew Riseborough's character like her star performer. And so to see it play out like this, and to see how Riseborough's performance and Abbott's performance have to kind of be one and the same in tandem, and the way that works, it is really wild. And I can just imagine, like, the lead in, like, preparing for this movie must have been really insane, but also so exciting for, like, from like an acting standpoint. And so you go into that, and then we get like our opening scene where there is a vicious murder, and that's one of the things that was really built up on the festival circuit, was how just like excessive the violence and the gores and stuff like that. And it's like, number one, that's just kind of the general Cronenberg way. Like, that's just kind of what you sign up for when you walk into a movie with any Cronenberg name on it. But the thing about this one in particular is this stabbing and how violent and visceral it is actually does, and it might sound like a stretch for anybody to say this in any context, but I mean, really, in the context of the movie, it serves a purpose as far as, like, the character herself, and even the plot, really. But it's like, I guess you can also look at it as this, because it's a movie that's so about, like, the mind and body and stuff like that, like, seeing what horrible, terrible things can be done to the human body, and how, like, resilient but also fragile and not invincible the body is. And the idea of this character, and how she essentially only really comes to life when she's committing murder or thinking about murder. Like, she has, like, you know, the husband and the kid and stuff like that, but her existence is just basically empty, and this is what really brings her, like, just gives her a life in general to live, causing death, ironically enough. But what I really love about this especially, and the fact that the character is an assassin, is the fact that movies tend to try to make assassins, like, cool and calm. Like, that's the sort of cliche. And there obviously there's a lot of movies that succeed in doing that. Many movies succeed in doing that, making assassins seem like cool and calm and stuff like that. But thinking about the fact of killing as a business, and that being your job, and that this is what this character basically lives for, is like the workings of a depraved, hellish mind, and getting inside that part of the concept of assassins in general is something that the movie really portrays in this really fascinating and creative way. And with often, like, nearly indescribable visuals. I saw, like, a few still images from this movie when I was kind of researching it before I saw it, and it was like, how the hell do these images have context to anything? Like, they're just so wild and otherworldly, and yeah, sure enough, they do. There's also, like, the idea of, like, the visuals that represent the change also, where, like, she melts and then reforms as him, and there's the whole, it's the poster of the movie, the Andrew Riseborough mask that he puts on at one point. There's glitches in what goes on. It's insane visually. And this is something, like, you'll see a lot of the visuals here kind of carry over to Infinity Pool also. But there's also cases, like I was talking about, of the performances being in tandem, where it's like, when, like, there's sometimes where, like, dialogue repeats within her life, when she's Christopher Abbott and his girlfriend says something, and then, like, in Andrew Riseborough's world, her husband says, like, the exact same sentence in, like, nearly the exact same context. And when all of this starts to blend together, and there's, like, this effect where, like, voices start to blend together, it's like, it becomes more ambiguous of who's in control throughout it, and that's also where a lot of the thrill of the movie comes from, on top of the story itself is interesting already. And that's the thing also, is it's like, it's one thing to have a concept, and another to put a story in that concept, and this is one where they just really work beautifully together. And, like I said, it is as sadistic as the story is, and as sadistic as some of the imagery is in the characters, It's so beautifully put together, and like from a writing standpoint, from a conceptual standpoint, visually, everything is working together to make this movie everything that it needs to be. And there's like I said, there's so many times, especially in sci-fi, where they'll come up with a concept and then they'll get so busy congratulating themselves on coming up with a concept that they don't come up with anything else. And so to see this movie just continue to be satisfying in just what it is in general is it's so rewarding to watch a movie like this, that just where Cronenberg gets like all possible mileage out of this idea. And it's, like I said, it's just really satisfying. If, obviously there's going to be that discomfort we talked about in Antiviral, but this is what I was talking about, where it's like you have something to accompany that discomfort, where you have something that thrills you and draws you in, and it just continues to impress you throughout it as it goes on. Is fantastic. And obviously, working in, other themes, like the fact that, Chris Rabbitt's job is like, data collecting, and then the whole thing with Sean Bean is there's like a whole empire of this, and the idea of the concept itself being like this invasion of privacy and like getting inside your mind and body and making you make decisions that you may not be making yourself, though it feels like you are. And it's like it just tackles all of this, but in this story that's so cool in its own way. And it's, like I said, just everything about it was really surprising and satisfying. And like I said, you almost underestimate it because the concept is so good, because you're like, there's no way they can deliver on this at feature length. And it just has something up its sleeve, like around every corner until the very, very end. And it's really fantastic. I wish I had seen it sooner, because it definitely would have been, when we did like our top 10s of 2020 and stuff like that, that would have been there. It's a really phenomenal movie, and as far as being a second movie goes, is, like I said, he maybe have almost done himself in for at least a little bit by setting the bar really high with Possessor, because we'll say right now, it's a bar that Infinity Pool doesn't quite reach. But it's, as far as a second movie goes, and just, as a movie in general, from any director, it's really, really fantastic. So I can't say enough good things about Possessor. So to go into Infinity Pool, which came out earlier this year, we are now in this era of the rich, and just rich people in general, getting just skewered to fuck in movies and TV. And that's okay. They can afford to get skewered to fuck in media, and it can be satisfying for us. So yeah, so we have this setting, and it does, and it might seem like kind of a cliche to have, like this really beautiful isolated setting, but there's also just something so sinister about it, where like the isolation and the way the score backs it up, where it's just this seemingly ideal place in this paradise, but there's just something so, very quickly you get the sense of some underlying evil or something. Like this is certainly a facade, and like for the more beauty there is, the more evil and disturbing factor there is underneath. And we get that pretty quickly, where like it's not even hiding that. I think that's how it manages to keep itself from feeling too cliche, is it's just wearing it on its sleeve, how there's a real fucked up nature to this place, where it's rich people indulging in, like, they seem to be indulging in other cultures, but they're doing it in these really sort of exaggerated and offensive ways, I imagine, to those people, whoever it may be. And the idea of these masks that are this continuing image throughout it, these really grotesque sort of like, it's like Twilight Zone masks, only a million times weirder and more disturbing. And it's said very casually, these are masks you can get at the gift shop, by the way. So add that to the addition of Mia Goth and her husband meeting Alexander Skarsgård and his wife, and it seems like this is just a chance meeting, and then this chance meeting is almost immediately punctuated by a very abrupt and aggressive sexual encounter. And this is the point very early on in the movie where it's like, Okay, so once again, the movie's not hiding anything at all about its nature, but the characters themselves especially, and it's like this sort of mysterious nature that we're coming from, where it's like we know there's something very off, and once again, it's the casting where he really sells this, where Alexander Skarsgård can do like really physical performances, and Mia Goth can do what Mia Goth can do. Like it's kind of ironic the events that transpire in Pearl because Mia Goth absolutely is a star, and she just continues to prove that. And she basically becomes the face of this, the very grotesque, deformed face of this movie. As this goes on, this performance goes on, because she's the one that kind of shapes the tone of the movie as it goes. Where like we can follow her and be able to keep up with the tone, because the tone does feel like it's kind of shifting a lot, but that's also as we go into this sort of nightmarish descent that is this world that these people populate. And the idea also of it being a foreign setting where everybody's here on vacation, so when Alexander Skarsgård gets himself in deep shit, it becomes very apparent very quickly that he is in a foreign place that, like many foreign places, is under a different set of rules and potentially much more aggressive and deadly rules. And so, once again, you can get a sense of an exaggerated thing going on here, but somehow there's like this reality that's constantly creeping into these things that feel very exaggerated, and that's where the horror really comes in. And that's where we get to like the main sort of meat of our concept, which is this idea of murder being punishable by either death or if you're rich enough and you're rich enough to get yourself out of a situation, you can have yourself cloned, and you have to watch your clone be executed by the firstborn child of the person you're responsible for the death of. And that seems like an interesting concept in itself, and it's like that's another one where it's like, okay, how do you expand on this? This should get really interesting. And while it may fall more into the antiviral category, where it's like it goes for a while and is able to find new ideas and ways to expand on this, but ultimately might fall a little short, rather than Possessor, which was able to do it all the way through. But still, there's a lot to admire in this movie. They do bring in the idea, when we have the idea of clones coming in and killing clones, obviously immediately it's going to come up of, what if the one that died was like the actual him, and are we sure we're who we actually are, or are we clones? Did the real person die long ago? Are they still somewhere? And it's like, this is stuff where it's like, it seems like it's going in an obvious direction when we bring clones into it, because it's like, this is the immediate conclusion you're going to jump to. So to have characters immediately jump on this and address this, that this is a possibility, is something where it's like it gets past that so that it can move on, and we the audience can move on to the next thing, that wherever this story is going to take us. So I like the fact that they kind of address that, and we can still have that in our minds through the whole movie, but it's not I don't think it's meant to be all consuming, the possibility that the clone and the real person, we might not be able to tell the difference as the movie goes on. And I could see people debating that forever as it goes on. But I got the vibe that, especially because characters mentioned it so early on, that it's not necessarily the point that we get too wrapped up in that, because there's a lot of other stuff going on here. As we've talked about with the other movies, there is going to be, violence and gore and stuff like that, and this one does seem toned down in comparison to Possessor as far as gore goes, and as far as like how the violence is portrayed. But there's still definitely those moments that creep in, stuff that the feeling that you'd want in a Cronenberg movie, that you're grossed out, but you're grossed out in that way that you sign up for, like we talked about. And so for me, it was the bubbles and the blood was the thing that really got to me for some reason, of all the things in here. But yeah, obviously there's something being said here when we're talking about skewering rich people, and that's the idea of when rich people can afford to have themselves cloned that can take the consequences of what they do, that means that they have no real consequence themselves, so they can just do whatever the fuck they want. And so basically the middle of this movie becomes a Clockwork Orange, basically, where they put on the masks and they go out and they partake in depravity and orgies and violence and all of that stuff. And like there's a whole home invasion moment. There's a couple of home invasions, I think. And the crazy thing about it is the casual nature, because of how much these people just don't care about. They don't care about consequences because they don't have them, because they can afford to not have them. And so as it goes on and it gets more grotesque and trippy, and there's like psychedelic sequences as far as the orgies go and stuff like that, and imagery that you will not be able to erase from your mind. Like I said, it does feel like sort of almost amplified versions of similar visuals we got in Possessor, but to show like the excess of the rich and stuff like that, and the full-on depravity going on here, and how basically all of these people are beyond the term psychopath. They're something else entirely. That's on a completely different island from psychopaths that might be like there isn't a word that's worse than psychopath for these people to take on. Um, and then eventually it gets to that point to where we get this feel as Skarsgård kind of starts to have a bit of have moments of clarity. The feeling of there being like no escape in that kind of taking on its own vibe, and that's something else that can be terrifying, especially like I said with like a setting where the character's in a foreign place where they don't completely comprehend the rules and the way people operate in a different way, and that's something that can be really, you can feel like sort of trapped and claustrophobic, and like this nightmarish sense of you're constantly running but you can't get away from the thing that's coming after you. And that's something to see Goth's performance kind of evolve also, where there's a point in time where she's on the hood of a moving car, and and just she's just so magnetic. It's insane what she can do. But this is where it does kind of run into a problem of feeling like really sort of stretched out, like it's really starting to stretch its concept a little bit, and the emotions that we're feeling in this sort of last third here. But at the same time, I guess it feels kind of intentionally stretched, where it's not just like, oh, they're dragging it out, but it's the idea of there's a lot of moments where, especially like the orgy scenes, where it's like it seems like they go on and on and on, and it's like it's basically like it's testing the audience's endurance, like how long can the audience last through something that feels like this. So there's actual scenes like that, and there's also individual moments. Like there's a moment where Mia Goth calls out Skarsgård's name, but she like drags out the note for a really long time, and like it gives you enough time to go, how long can she hold this? And it's like stuff like that where it feels like, and the fact that that's kind of in the movie itself is like stretching itself like that, of like how much can you take as an audience, is kind of what it feels like. And that I can in the sort of infinite theme makes sense with that. But yeah, as far as that goes, it does. I can appreciate that for a while, but then it does start to feel less like, oh, how much more can I take, and more just, all right, I know what it is now, so it's, we can move forward, and it's still kind of stuck in place a little bit. So it's like after you get it, and that's where it can maybe fall into a bit of a trap there. But like I said, there's still a lot to take in with this. There's still a lot to admire here, especially from a filmmaking standpoint on Cronenberg's part. And it's honestly, one of the most impressive things about it is just how much they got away with showing, and the fact that it actually got like a mainstream wide release. So it's like credit to Neon for going all in on this. And like the fact that this was in theaters everywhere is just a really insane and kind of hilarious thought. So yeah, and obviously speaking of that, yeah, dark humor all over the damn place with this. But surely you can pick up on that. So that's, I think, how I feel about these three. So yeah, I feel like he started off, as a strong debut for Antiviral as far as showing what he could do as a filmmaker, and that he could really, capture like a vibe and this, sort of tone of discomfort, and use it enough within a story, even if it kind of fell short a little bit. Then Possessor, he does something amazing. And Infinity Pool is something not as amazing, but you can still feel that filmmaker in there, and that he's probably on his way as far as like going up. But we'll see what happens. I can, like, when he really makes like the movie of his career, I'll be really curious to see what that is. Because right now, like I said, Possessor's a pretty high bar, so we'll see what happens. So that's going to be these three. So we've got like a couple more verses, or a few more verses, and then we're going to talk about a franchise, and we've got like one more movie club, and then that should be about it for October. We're finally almost done. So yeah. So until all that, I think that's it.